Good morning to everyone. As mentioned, my name is Gemma Carmody and I'm training manager for Seeker, based in Yorkshire and Humberside, but also doing work for all our northern regions and for Seeker National. Delighted once again to welcome Geraldine Fleming as our speaker for today, doing a presentation on claims under NEC. If anyone does have any questions for Geraldine, she's good enough to answer them. Very nice of her.
Easy ones, easy ones.
The really long ones in paragraphs are the ones that I really enjoy. So yeah, if anyone does have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat box. If you're on your laptop, the chat box should be directly in front of you. If you're using a mobile device, then you might have to swipe to get to the chat box, but it's usually quite easy to get to. The slides, one of the questions I always get asked is, are the slides available? So after the webinar, you should all have my contact details from the invitations and registrations that you'll have received. So if you would like a copy of the slides, either email myself or Geraldine and we'll make sure that you get a copy of the slides after the event today. So as I said, any questions, feel free to put them into the chat box and Geraldine will have a look at them afterwards. The only other thing I would ask is at the end, I'll put up a really brief, I think it's 3 questions, just little feedback bit just to see, you know, how you felt today was and any ideas that you've got for future webinars or seminars. So without further ado, I'll pass you on to Geraldine Fleming of Driver Tret. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gemma, and welcome to everybody for this morning's seminar. Possibly slightly incorrectly titled Claims NEC3, because I'm sure lots and lots of you are aware that actually there isn't really a claims provision under NEC3, and therefore some people are definitely scratching their heads in terms of how they go about claiming extensions of time and prolongation costs, and that's the purpose of this seminar. Definitely I'll be concentrating on NEC3 because of course we do have the NEC4 longer webinar coming up at the end of June as well. As is normal, the first few slides in the packs are some marketing information about the firm that I work for. So the company I work for is Driver Tret, and we provide support to the engineering and construction industries from start to finish. And you can see some of the types of sectors that we work in at the moment. We are a market leader in expert witness, planning, commercial, technical, importantly, dispute avoidance, and also, of course, dispute resolution. We were established in 1978, stock market listed, and there's over 500 of us working worldwide. 3 main parts of the business. We have on the left-hand side, driver project services, which is essentially a staff augmentation part of the business. So we can provide project managers, QSs, and planners into projects on a short, medium, or long-term basis. In the middle of the slide, you can see the part of the business that I work for, which is Driver Tret, and we do work up front before you have even been awarded the contract at tender stage, taking organisations through the contract negotiations, obviously also working with them on live projects and then assisting with the settlement of the final account at the end, and obviously then into dispute resolution services if we haven't managed to get a settlement. On the right hand side, you can see our Dialis part of the business, which is the expert witness division. So we have experts on quantum, planning or delay analysis, as well as technical. So we do have structural engineers and architects who are working within the business. And we also do have adjudicators, arbitrators and mediators working there as well. We have our current digest magazine, which you can get from looking on our website, taking a photograph of the QR code or emailing our marketing department. And we do have a new digest magazine coming out shortly. If you do want to be added to the marketing list for that, again, please email marketing or please email myself. On the slide in front of you, I've put some examples of the types of things that we get involved in. Certainly one of the favourite parts of the things that I do on a regular basis is actually reviewing contracts and subcontracts before you sign up to them, making sure that we identify key clauses, risk and obligations as well, to make sure that ideally that you're not in a bad position going forward. We can obviously check your notices and contract correspondence. Importantly, also checking applications for payment and payment notices, which are vital at this particular moment in time. We have planners and delay analysts who also work for the business, who can look at the programs that you've put in and making sure that they reflect not just the requirements of the contract, but also whether it's COVID-19 or other events. We're finding that certainly at the moment, a number of our staff are involved in assisting with the preparation of compensation events. Of course, that's the NEC term. On other contracts, it might well be extensions of time, loss and expense. As I've already mentioned, we can assist on the final account side, so negotiation, claim preparation, and then into adjudication. Bespoke webinars. I don't think I've ever done so many webinars as I have in the last 2 months. I'm not sure, I think probably we might stick with these a little bit going forward as well. And then we do also have our own driver threat help desk as well, which again, you'll find on our website. A little bit about me. I know I have some friends on the call today that are also quantity surveyors, so shout out to the QSs on the webinar. I'm a chartered ex-BOL for BT. Also, I've completed a law degree and my solicitor's exams, and I've worked in construction claims consultancy now for over 20 years. So on with the seminar. What are we going to cover today? Well, in brief, we're going to do a little bit on overview and some general principles, a tiny bit on record keeping, because everything that I talked about on the previous seminar on record keeping will very much feed into what you're looking at now in terms of claims for time and money. I'm going to do a little bit then on just some principles in relation to time, and then move on and look at how the compensation system works. Because of time constraints this morning, I am going to concentrate on option A, but by all means, if any of you have got any queries on option C, do get in touch and we can run through those on the phone. So, overview and general principles. I think if I was starting from scratch, working now for a contractor or a subcontractor, one of the documents that I would definitely advise that you get hold of would be something called the SCL protocol. That's the Society of Construction Law Delay and Construction Protocol. The objective of this particular protocol is to provide useful guidance on some of the common delay and disruption issues that arise on construction projects, where one party wishes to recover from the other an extension of time and or compensation for the additional time spent and the resources used to complete the project. I am old enough to remember when this first came out, which was back in 2002, and there have been some tweaks to it since that first edition. So there was a Rider 1 to the first edition in July 2015, a draft second edition back in June 2016, and then the final second edition in February 2017. I do like using this word as a typical quantity surveyor. This is available for free from the SCL itself. If you go to that particular website, so the scl.org.uk, you will easily find the instructions to download. From memory, you will need to put in your email address, and they then will send you a link in order for you to download it. So I can thoroughly recommend that particular document. Do note, though, it's not a legally binding document. I would call it guidance notes. Part of it is good practice. It is probably a little bit more biased to NEC contracts than to more traditional JCT ICE contracts. So that's just a little bit of an overview. Records, gosh, I probably, without any notes, I could probably do a half day just on this particular area. And I cannot emphasize to everybody who is listening in enough how important this record keeping is going to be. I think I mentioned on the last webinar that I did for Seeker, picture the scene. It's 90 days from today, and you're sat across the table from, it could be the project manager, it could be the employer, if you're the subby, it could be the main contractor, and you're trying to persuade them as to the validity of your claim. Your case will stand or fall by the quality of the records that you have kept. Going back to the SEL protocol, there are some good guidelines in there in relation to the record keeping that you should be looking at keeping. I would be in favour at the moment of you thinking, if I just take it in a COVID environment, that you specifically think about, again, what do I need to have 90 days from now to prove the case that I want to put forward? And so if you have redeployed labour, think about how and why you have done that. Have you changed the shift patterns? Have you staggered shifts? Or have you brought in weekend working? All to do with social distancing. All of this information should be recorded very, very clearly. It would not be enough to simply say, well, we should have had 10 people working on the project doing 40 hours a week, and we've now got 20 people on the project, and actually we're only getting the same level of productivity out of them. You need to be very, very specific as to what they are actually doing. The last bullet point there talks about the record of time and outputs. So again, absolutely have a think about the projects that you're currently working on and exactly what you will need to keep record keeping wise. I've already said that you need to keep the records, but it goes without saying that you should, of course, also be storing these records very, very safely. In an ideal world, it would be great if you were putting together a weekly progress report and attaching the daily record sheets for labour and plant to that weekly progress report. It would be even better if you could have those records signed off as a contemporaneous record of what has occurred. Remember, all of this information about record keeping feeds into your entitlements on both time and money. Now, I am going to spend the next few slides just talking about some time principles. And I know for an awful lot of you, this is very, very straightforward stuff. So my first question, if I am looking at taking an initial view of an entitlement to an extension of time, well, I need to know whether time is actually specified in the contract. And for the vast majority of contracts that you guys get involved in, of course it will be. It will specify either a start date and a finish date, or it will specify a period for completion. So you will know that your project is 10 weeks or 72 weeks or 53 weeks. And if time is specified in the contract, then of course it is a contractual obligation. However, if time isn't specified, or somebody has typed in the letters TBA or TBC, so to be advised or to be confirmed, then what the courts will do is imply a reasonable time for completion. Some planners rub their hands together with glee when they see that, because it means that they are now going to spend a period of time trying to work out what on earth a reasonable time is. And actually, this does happen more than you would think. I've certainly worked on at least 3 projects in the past year where there was no period for completion agreed. I don't think any of those organisations, whether the ones I was working for or the ones that were on the other side of the table, would ever knowingly do that again. I've got a case here, Shorten Engineering and DGP International, back in 2005. This is a case that went to the Court of Appeal, so I'm certainly feeling the chinging of the cash registers when it comes to the costs of the legal representation. And the Court of Appeal explained that reasonableness was to be determined at the time when the question arises in the light of all the relevant circumstances. So again, the only way I can describe a reasonable time is effectively as a piece of elastic. You need to look at the context. But of course, going forward, everybody who's on this particular webinar will make sure that time is clearly specified. Just think of other issues though as well that might make that time period a little bit foggier. So things like shutdown periods. Are you going to close over Easter, summer, or the Christmas break? And make sure that that is expressly referred to in the contract as well. Why do we have extension of time provisions? Well, whilst sometimes it looks very much as if extension of time provisions are there for the benefit of the contractor, actually, in theory, the reason that we have extension of time provisions is so that the employer always has a clear date from when they can deduct liquidated damages. So if there was an employer delay and the period of time goes from 25 weeks to 30 weeks, contractor gets an extension of time of 5 weeks, then the employer's right to liquidated damages, or of course under NEC, delayed damages, would then run from the end of week 30. So the employer's right to those delayed damages continues from the new date. The other reason for it having extension of time provisions in the contract is, of course, to share the risk on what are called neutral events. Now, in an unamended NEC 3 contract, there are no neutral events. The list of items, and we will go through these in a few minutes, in relation to an entitlement to an extension of time, basically it's an all or nothing. So in other words, you would get time and money. I am aware, though, that a number of clients, employers, and main contractors, when they're looking at their subcontracts, they will actually change the compensation event structure within the NEC. So, for example, for weather, or even for item 19, which is, of course, the COVID item, that the risk is shared so that the contractor or subcontractor would get an extension of time, but they wouldn't necessarily get the costs. You will need to look at your Z clauses to make sure that you are clear on that particular item. Moving very quickly on and looking very briefly at the issue of the planned programme. Obviously at Driver Trek, we see a huge variety of planned programmes, from the briefest ever, or actually even those that don't exist, all the way across to very, very detailed programmes. And bear in mind that these planned programmes will also, of course, contain an element of uncertainty themselves. They could be uncertain because of provisional sums, input required from third parties, whether they're subcontractors or suppliers, whether there's any kind of contracted design portion, things like winter working allowances, available skilled labour, and of course the fact that as a project develops, things do change, and also better ways are found of actually continuing with the project. Remember, though, that it is very difficult, particularly in construction, to plan too far ahead. And there is a question as to how much detail do you need to have on the programme in relation to something that might be 6 or 12 months away. You might want to think about it in this way, that it might be that there is an overall contract or master programme which effectively is strategic. It's looking at the overall project implementation, but short-term programme that sit underneath actually look at the tactical programme side. In other words, the what, the how and the when of specific parts of that particular project. Again, it's difficult to give advice to the whole civil engineering fraternity on this, because every single job is different. A motorway project is going to be very, very different from a bridge, which is going to be very different again from, let's say, foundations for a process plant that's being built. What I can say with some certainty, though, is that COVID-19 is only going to make the planned programme more uncertain. And obviously, some of you will be involved on jobs which actually stopped and have restarted or are about to restart. And obviously we are all learning about the ways that we can properly manage social distancing issues. What I would want to see on all of the programs, of course, though, is a critical path network. I would want to see it covering the scope of the works and in adequate detail. Again, thinking about the COVID issue, think about delays, whether it's self-isolation of key resources, different working methodologies, and also different distancing requirements as well. The new COVID of working day might well involve different working patterns to limit the number of trades at a particular place at one time, different working patterns to stagger the trades or different subcontractors' start and finish times, again, different working days. It might also involve night shift, increased working time and increased walking time because of multiple welfare areas, and of course increased hand washing, toolbox talks and safety requirements as well. They will all have an impact on productivity and of course on the completion date as well. That's very much concentrating on the planned programme. Of course, when it comes to the as-built programme, we can definitely get bogged down in the detail. What we do want to have with as-built programmes, and I'm going to say the R word again here, we need detailed, accurate and complete records. We appreciate, of course, that activity start and finish dates may well be difficult to ascertain, and also the as-built logic may be difficult to work out. You may even have intermittent activity. So you can see, or you might just be able to work out the program on the left looks very, very straightforward and smooth. The one on the right, you can see almost a staccato with the yellow bars as they're shown there. Definitely, whenever again I've been involved in extension of time claims, there is definitely a subjective interpretation of the facts. Again, what I can say with some certainty is when we are looking at COVID-related issues, again, we must have proper as-built data that is correctly and sufficiently and accurately recorded, because what you're going to want to do is say, this is where we were up to, then COVID hit, and then what effectively are the effects of that COVID issue. We wouldn't want the clients or the employer to be able to come back and say, well, actually, you went a little bit too far on your social distancing, or you didn't go far enough. You didn't think about these other possibilities with extra hand washing or night work or shift work or whatever. And what we are looking to do here is definitely separate what was the cause, so COVID-19, and then what were the effects that were actually linked to that particular cause. When we're looking at establishing an extension of time, a very good starting point is this particular case, Balfour Beatty Construction and the London Borough of Lambeth 2002. And the judge in this particular case set down the requirements to establish an extension of time. 2002, probably the judge was not thinking in any way in relation to the NEC contract at all. So if you effectively take this slide and the next one as the basics. So what we're looking to do here is take the original programme and basically substantiate that original programme to show its validity and reliability as the correct contractual starting point. If you yourself have got issues with that programme, they need to be corrected. Then revised programmes should be produced on the occurrence of every event to provide a satisfactory and convincing demonstration of cause and effect. A valid critical path needs to be established, both initially, so on the original programme, and at every later point, since of course the critical path will almost certainly move as you go through the project. Finally, under this particular case, it was held that there needs to be a means of demonstrating the effect of concurrent or parallel delays for which the employer will not be responsible. So that might be because there's been delays to the delivery of materials, or a subcontractor didn't turn up potentially for 3 days as well. For those of you who are very, very familiar and currently working with NEC contracts, I'm sure that the phrase time impact analysis has been mentioned, and you will see the similarities with a time impact analysis in relation to what we've just talked about on that Balfour Beatty case. So looking at time impact analysis, what this aims to do is you take the planned programme, you update it with progress to reflect the planned intent immediately before the onset of delay. So in other words, immediately before COVID-19 started to affect construction sites. That might well be the contractor's contemporaneous programmes updated with progress as recorded in the monthly progress reports. Again, make sure that you're checking the planned programme to make sure that it is realistic and reflects any potential mitigation measures. Those delay events are then added in, the programme is rescheduled, time is analysed, and then the difference between the original completion date and the new completion date, once the delay event has been included, is looked at. But of course, the programme might need further review to assess any unrealistic logic or sequencing. So when specifically now we're looking at COVID events, remember, we want a robust programme, a robust project control procedure. I'm going to say the R word yet again. The record keeping on progress and as-built data is hugely important. We want to record that information so it's available. You should also know your work patterns and calendars. And then, of course, you should make sure that you are reviewing any incomplete activity durations to see whether previous progress should be reflected. And it goes without saying, of course, that notices and early warnings that are required by the contract are actually submitted as well. A subsection really of the heading of time is disruption. Now, disruption can affect the end date, or it can lead to some kind of what I would call prelim or prolongation thickening. The SCL protocol gives us a very nice definition of disruption, and that is disturbance, hindrance, or interruption of a contractor's normal work progress that results in lower efficiency or lower productivity than would otherwise be achieved. Disruption does not necessarily result in delay to progress or completion. So again, thinking about that on a COVID-related issue, you can be both delayed and disrupted by COVID. Delayed because the site was shut, or disrupted because you've had to take on board different working patterns. Again, obviously there's more information there about how you would look at disruption. Again, it comes back to record keeping, and particularly record keeping in relation to the programme. What had you planned to do? Where's the evidence? And what actually happened? And again, you're looking to provide the evidence. There is a case back in 1985 called Whittle Builders and Chester Street. It kind of, in some ways, a little bit of a one-off, because what they were able to do in this particular project is there was a period of time at the start of the project where the work wasn't disrupted, and they were able to work out the productivity during that non-disrupted period. And then they looked at the productivity whilst there were delaying events that weren't the contractor's fault. And this has become known as the measured mile approach. And quite simply, the judge in this particular case accepted this particular method of measuring disruption. But of course, the contractor here was able to provide brilliant record keeping in relation to the work that was done in the non-disrupted period, and then the work that was done in the disrupted period, compared one with the other, and the contractor was successful in claiming disruption on a loss of productivity basis. a little bit more information there about the way that you can actually use that measured mile approach. If you are being disrupted now, then I would thoroughly recommend that you have your own record keeping sheet. And that record keeping sheet could look something along these lines. So it's done on a daily basis. You describe the location and the work that's actually being carried out, and you specifically highlight any time where you were stopped or any time where you were disrupted. It might be that you can do this on a per operative per day basis, or it might be that you have to have 3 or 4 sheets per operative per day. Again, you need to have a look at this particular example sheet and then apply it and adapt it so that it specifically fits your own circumstances. So that was a little bit in relation to the time side. What I'm going to do now is move on to looking at specifically claims for time and money in an NEC context. And of course, in an NEC context, the catchphrase is compensation events. The reasons for which a contractor can claim time or money, they are all set out in clause 60.1 in an NEC3 contract. What you can see on the board and for the next few slides is the list of compensation events that are in a normal NEC3 contract. Again, just watch out for the Z clauses. So compensation event 60.1 brackets 1 is where the project manager gives an instruction changing the works information. That could actually be where the project manager had given you an instruction to stand down because of COVID-related issues. We have got some examples here within our organisation where our clients were given those types of instructions. Item 2, where the employer doesn't allow access or use of a part of the site. So again, it might just be that a part of the site has been closed to the contractor. Item 3, where the employer themselves haven't provided something that they should have provided. You can see all of those 3 are highlighted in yellow because I think that there potentially is something there that you could use on a COVID-related type claim. More on the following sheet. Project manager gives an instruction to stop or not start work or change a key date. Item 5, the employer or others don't work within the times on the programme or in the conditions in the works information, or there's new work on the site that's not stated in the works information. Again, I can see COVID-related issues there. Item 6, the PM or the supervisor doesn't reply to a communication within the period required by the contract. The period for reply under an NEC is normally 2 weeks. Again, that can be changed, but that would be the normal period of time. I am aware of organisations that have furloughed staff over the past few months, and that might well have had an impact on your projects. I did try, but I couldn't think of a reason why we would use 7 in a COVID-related context, and of course that's to do with antiquities. The following slide I'm not going to go through. Again, I think it's unusual that you would see any of those related to COVID. Unusual, but not impossible. And similarly for the physical conditions, which up to the onset of COVID probably was the one that I would have given the most advice out to organisations. Weather on its own, obviously, is also a compensation event, probably not a COVID-related issue. COVID generally is going to be covered by one of the other items. It might well be, though, 14, 16 or 17 could be involved. So 14 is an event which is the employer's risk. You will need to look at contract data part 1 for that one. 16, where the employer doesn't provide materials, facilities or samples for tests or inspections. Obviously, I'm sure you're all aware that there have been particularly builders merchants that have been closed down. If there were free issue materials that were being issued, 16 might be COVID related. 17, those organisations who actually employ project managers and project managers themselves, item 17 is hugely useful in relation to COVID related issues. A very good project manager would have told the contractor to include, when they're pricing compensation events, particularly COVID-related compensation events, potentially to include an assumption. So that assumption could be to do with the length of time that the site is closed, or part of the site is closed, or indeed the length of time that social distancing would have to be incorporated within their working day. I don't think it's used enough generally within the industry. Of course, then we have item 19, almost starting to be referred to as the COVID clause, but of course it's wider than that. So if an event occurs which stops the contractor completing the work, or stops the contractor completing the work by the date shown on the accepted programme, neither party could prevent. An experienced contractor would have judged that the contract date to have such a small chance of occurring, it would have been unreasonable for him to have allowed for it, and importantly, is not one of the other compensation events in this contract, then this is probably where you're going to end up. Obviously, for contracts signed, it's difficult to give advice on this, certainly before December 2019, perhaps contracts signed before the 1st of March 2020, I would say that an experienced contractor would have judged that COVID-19 would have had a very small chance of occurring. And so we get through that particular issue. Again, all of the contracts that we at Driver Tret have been working on over the past few weeks and months, you have to look at that particular possibility in the light of what's actually going on your particular projects, to see if you come under clause 19 or any of the other CEs that I've already mentioned. Notices are hugely important, and something that I definitely mentioned on the very first webinar that we did for Seeker a couple of months ago. I'm sure that you're all very, very familiar with the fact that we have 61.3 within the main contract, same clause number within the subcontract, and this is about the importance of the contractor notifying the project manager of the occurrence of a CE, a compensation event. You can see highlighted in yellow, the word 8 is highlighted. Again, watch out for changes on that. That period of time might well have been reduced. If you haven't given a COVID-19 notice on a project by now, then you are probably too late. Okay. Again, you need to look at the facts of your particular contract. But again, an awful lot of clients and employers will actually reduce that period down further. I've highlighted in red there. Is it the most important clause in the contract? Probably it's the one that I talk to people about most, and making sure that those notices are properly given. When we're then looking at actually valuing the prolongation and disruption costs that will flow from a COVID-related issue, or indeed any issue, importantly, you must recognise that we're looking at both the time and the money aspects. When we talk about time, we're looking at delay to the completion date or key dates, and I've added in there as well, and any sections of the work as well. Because of course, if you've got the sectional completion supplement or the X clause applying to your particular contracts, you will need to ask for an extension to those as well. So that's the time side. And of course, you've then got the money that flows from that. When we're talking about the money, we then move into clause 63, and we're looking at an assessment of forecast and or recorded defined cost under 63.1, an assessment of time under 63.3, and also cost risk allowances. And remember here, I'm using NEC 3 clause numbers, clause 63.6, which arise from that compensation event. So cost risk allowances, just taking the bottom item, what could they be? Well, when you're looking at the assessment of a compensation event, that assessment must include for cost and time risk allowances. The test being that they should have a significant chance of occurring, they should be at the contractor's risk, and that they aren't a compensation event in its own right. So let's take an easy one. It could be to do with material wastage. What material wastage would you have on concrete or on mortar or on bricks? In theory, that should be easy to agree with the project manager. Downtime due to inclement weather, probably on the easier side, but again, that's something that should be talked about and should be discussed and should be included when you are actually assessing compensation events. Allowances for other delays, I have no doubt, will be a source of debate with the project manager. And this is where the PM can actually include assumptions for the contractor to use at the time that these are being priced. Disruption, again, will be a source of debate, as will winter working and then social distancing under COVID-19 as well. But the contractor's job is to include those cost risk allowances when you are actually assessing the compensation events. Generally, we are looking at the direct costs which are associated with compensation events. But of course, here, a big factor to take account of will be your time-related costs. So that could be your additional supervisory staff, or of course, the fact that cabins, scaffolding, etc. are needed or forecast to be needed for a longer length of time because of that compensation event. Importantly, and highlighted in bold and capital letters on this slide, what you can't do under NEC contracts is have all of your compensation events beautifully listed out and then at the bottom have a delay and disruption claim, which is a common way of proceeding under a JCT style contract. What you must do within an NEC contract is include the delay and disruption and of course all the time related prelims in relation to each of the compensation events in each particular assessment. Okay, again, we're looking at it on a forecast basis or an actual basis. You need to read the contracts very carefully to make sure that you're properly including that within each compensation event. So we have already done a little bit on the time side, looking at plan programs and as built. How do we adjust these prices? Well, clause 63.1 needs lots and lots of investigation. We're looking here at, again, the actual defined cost, the forecast defined cost, and the resulting fee. 52.1 gives us some indication on defined cost, and we're looking there at rates and percentages in the contract data and other amounts at open market or competitively tendered prices. Defined cost also links us to the schedule of cost components. If you're on options A or B, then it's the cost of components in the shorter schedule of cost components, regardless of whether that work is subcontracted or not. If it's C, D, or E, then it's the schedule of cost components, but you also have you deal with subcontractors separately. So there are two schedules. You need to know your option and then go to the correct schedule of cost components. I've given you on the slide there just a flavour of the differences. So on A and B, the shorter schedule of cost components as described, and then you add in people overheads, design overheads, and a subcontracted fee percentage or direct fee percentage. On C, D, or E, you're looking at adding in working area overheads, manufacture and fabrication overheads, design overheads, and then again, the fee percentage as well. I've talked several times already on this particular webinar in relation to actual defined cost and forecast defined cost. And I have to say, there is a little bit of head scratching that goes on here. How do you work this out, and when is the particular different elements of defined cost used? When we're looking at actual defined cost, that's the work already done, and forecast defined cost for the work not yet done. So if a compensation event is due to a project manager's instruction, issuing a certificate, changing a decision, correcting assumption, then the dividing date is the date of that instruction. Otherwise, if it's none of those, it's the date when the compensation event was notified. So in some instances, you might end up pricing each compensation event twice, partly on an actual defined cost basis. The CE notification is then issued, and then post that particular date, everything else is done on a forecast basis. Again, keep linking that defined cost definition back to the schedule of cost components. And again, I've given you there a little bit of a table with the different percentages that you would then be adding on. So when we move into the schedule of cost components, a key issue is the issue of working areas. Both the longer schedule and the shorter schedule of cost components, we're looking at cost components for people and equipment who are working in the working areas. Now, in a very confusing manner, there are two definitions of working areas in the contract. You have the italicized terms, so the working areas are described in the contract data part 2. You've got the capitalized working areas, and you've also got the italicized working areas, which are necessary for providing the works and used only for work in this contract. Keep that in mind. Sorry, I'll just bring the slide up now. Keep that difference in mind as we go through and read over the information that's in the shorter schedule of cost components. So you can see there, we've got an italicized working area. Check out your contract data part 2. That's the bit that the contractor fills in. You've also got the definition of working area with capital letters as well. So I would normally expect your italicized area to be a smaller area. And then the working area, you have to then look at this particular definition as well. Certainly, I have read over this several times over the past few weeks and months in relation to this COVID-related issue. When you are claiming people costs, we're looking at directly employed labour, staff, subcontract labour within that particular definition. So item 1. The following components of the cost of bullet 1, people who are directly employed by the contractor and whose normal place of working is within the working area. I can certainly look at that and think about a site-based engineer, a site-based project manager, or a site-based quantity surveyor who normally are working on site and so fall within the definition of the working areas, but temporarily have been working at home. If we take a straightforward interpretation of that particular bullet point, if you're directly employed, you're normally working on site, and temporarily you're working from home, the people costs should still be included within the compensation event notification. The second category, I think, will give you more problems. So people who are directly employed by the contractor, normally they're not within the working area, but under non-COVID related issues, they're working within the working area. So that's your visiting site manager, visiting health and safety officer. If they're now purely working from home, then actually you won't be able to claim the costs of those people. And then, of course, we've got people who aren't directly employed by the contractor and who are paid because of the time that they're working in the working area. Again, I think that would preclude people who are working from home. There is a possibility, of course, that you could agree with the client employer project manager that working from home, given these very unusual circumstances, that they can come within people costs. For bullets 2 and 3, that would need a specific agreement. I've given you on the slide in front of you there an example of people costs, and then of course at a later point we're also going to apply the fee there as well, the overheads and the fee. Equipment costs, you will need to go through the relevant sections of the schedule of cost components to make sure that you are claiming correctly for the relevant equipment. Again, within the notes, there is an example of those equipment costs and how that you could put those together in a spreadsheet in relation, in my example there, it's alteration of foundation details. The contractor here, I think, has been quite generous with a seeker rate less 20%. Hopefully, for the contractors on the line, they've got a better rate than that. People overhead, when we're talking about, of course, the shorter schedule of cost components, we apply the people overhead. It's not relating to the overhead of the employment for people. It's used to cover the costs of things like your utilities. And again, there is a longer list there as well. Quite simply, to apply the people overhead, you take the total cost of people and then you apply the relevant people overhead. And in this case, you can see that that's 10%. You've obviously then also got design costs and manufacture and fabrication costs to take account of. And of course, they are normally put on the spreadsheet. You might well have rates agreed for those people. And then, of course, you're going to apply the design overhead percentage. Hopefully that all the things I've covered there in relation to the scheduler cost components or shorter scheduler cost components are fairly straightforward, but can I advise you all to make sure that you carry on going back to the printed form, to the shorter schedule of cost components, and you read the words very, very carefully, particularly in relation to the people overheads side. When we then move on and look at the fee itself and applying the fee to the defined cost, again, look at the contract. Clause 11.2 brackets 8 talks about the fee being the sum of the amounts calculated by applying the subcontract fee percentage to the defined cost of subbies and the direct fee percentage to the defined cost of other work. The fee is referenced at the contract data part 2, and then also make sure that you check out the definition of subcontractors as well. Remember, if as you go through the schedule of cost components or the shorter schedule, if you can't find it in there, then it's automatically included in the fee. As a guide, I would be expecting the fee to be higher than the traditional overheads and profit percentage that I would normally see. Obviously, then you take the total costs as you've calculated from the other spreadsheets. The subcontract fee is applied to the subcontract costs. Here we've got 25%. And the direct fee is applied to everything else. Again, here we've got 12%. And that then becomes effectively, potentially the new activity on the activity schedule. Now, if I think about this particularly again in a COVID-related environment, this also presents a problem. And that problem is, when are you going to be paid for that particular compensation event? Because of course, you only get paid an activity on an activity schedule when that is completed. So for contractors and subcontractors for a COVID-related issue, what I would want you to do is agree to split that new COVID activity that's gone onto the activity schedule. Otherwise, the contractor would be stood out of their money potentially for several months before they are properly recompensed for it. Finally, very, very briefly on non-NEC contracts. Now, I appreciate the vast majority of you are working on NEC contracts, but it might be that you do have a couple of non-NEC contracts. If I was looking at this in a very traditional sense, I'd be looking at talking about loss and expense or cost and expense. And you would be looking at a proper definition of the actual prolongation costs which incurred at the time that the delay happened. You'd be looking at actual staff costs, site costs such as cabins and plant and communications, other costs such as insurances and bonds, plant and equipment, head office overheads, and finance charges as well. It's a very different way of putting your claim together. So we do have a couple of minutes for questions, so I'm sure Gemma is going to come in a minute. Before I do that, I'm just going to say thank you very much for sticking with me during this very, very quick and fast-paced seminar. You can see my contact details on the slide there. I can see that we do have some questions, so I'm just going to do a little bit of flicking here. For those of you who do want a copy of the slides, you can see my email address there. Great. Okay. Right. We have a question in front of us. Right. If a contract was delayed due to COVID-19 and the contract dates have been amended accordingly, great. However, the contract program referenced in CD1, so contract data 1, is then a week behind. What does this expose the contractor to? Experiencing delays, however, with the contradictory dates, I'm unsure if I go from the program dates or the contract dates. Right, okay, so if I read, I'm going to read this through again. Contract has been delayed due to COVID-19 and the contract dates have been okay. I think what needs to happen here, but I'm very happy, Katie, if you want to give me a buzz afterwards. I think what you need to do is effectively, there needs to be a revised program issued. I think what's happened here is you've got a mismatch between the contract dates in the contract and the program dates. There isn't an order of priority in the contract, so to speak. So I would suggest that the contractor actually reissues the contract program to reflect the revised contract dates, and ideally and sensibly what should then happen is the project manager should accept that updated program. That mismatch, you want to do that as soon as possible. Otherwise, there is a potential risk, obviously, on delay damages, etc. Okay, do we have another one, Gemma?
Hello, can you hear me, Geraldine?
I can hear you loud and clear, Gemma. Hello. Yes.
Yeah, we don't really have any other questions at the moment, unless anybody wants to put any into the chat. We don't. I have one comment from Guy, who's our director at Seeker Northwest, who's just put on that Seeker have released a safe working video today. If you are a member, obviously you can go onto our website. Just a short video on working safely on sites. So that's just a bit of further information. But other than that, we have no questions.
Okay, I think the only other thing then I'd say on the back of Guy's post there about that safe working video, I think that will constitute potentially, although I haven't seen it myself, I think that potentially could constitute excellent evidence as to the steps that contractors have needed to take in order to work safely going forward. I'm thinking particularly of employers and their representatives and project managers who actually can't get to site at the moment because of their own internal procedures or whatever. I think that safe working video could well prove vital for contractors going forward in order to give further weight to their claims as well. I can also see another question that's come up. Right, I'm keeping my fingers crossed, but I'm sure Gemma is going to clarify this. The NEC 4 webinar. So this is a much bigger event than this very, very fast review that we've done today. We are going to be looking at essentially the whole of the NEC 4 contract, including obviously how you price compensation events as a small section of it. It's the 24th and the 25th of June. Is that right, Gemma?
It is, yeah.
Excellent. And very roughly, the times are going to be roughly 9 till 12:30 with a nice break in the middle, because I'm sure that everybody will need decent caffeine stops and toilet breaks when we're doing a bit more of a longer length webinar. So 24th, 25th, we're going for the morning slot. Roughly 9, 9:15 till around 12:30, and there will be a decent 50-minute break in the middle. And that's going to be an overall review of the NEC 4 contract, not just looking at the little bits that we've looked at today on NEC 3.
So what I'll be doing for that is we have now got the links for booking places on that. So for everyone who's registered on today's webinar, I will send you across an invitation to that. And much as you do with this one, if you could just register on, and then you should receive confirmation and some joining instructions. So I'll make sure that everyone that's registered to today's event gets a link to the longer one, which will be over the course of 2 days, as Geraldine said. So 2 half days, really.
Yeah.
Excellent. But yeah, I'll make sure that everyone gets that. But if for any reason you don't, feel free to drop me an email and I'll make sure that that does get across to you. And I think that's it. So thank you very much to everyone for joining. I'll just put up our very brief survey if you could hit a few buttons just for a minute or so. Thank you, and thank you for the positive comments that we've just had. We've just had a few thank yous in. Thank you once again to Geraldine for another fantastic webinar. The feedback we get from these is always really, really positive. So thanks again for your time and effort in putting this together, Geraldine.
No problem.
And thank you everyone else. Hopefully some people are getting a little bit back to some kind of normality out there. But as always, as Seeker members, if there's anything that we can do within your regions, feel free to get in touch with me or your regional directors, and we'll do anything that we can to support you. Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you at hopefully our next webinars on the 24th and 25th of June.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Cheers.
Bye.